Okay, so number 6 has all kinds of things going on, and it's definitely the hardest problem on here. So we need to look at a couple things. The first is that we definitely do not have a leading coefficient of 1. So that tells us we're either going to have to use the greatest common factor method, or we are going to have to use that harder diamond problem. But before I worry about that, what I notice is this right-hand side is not set equal to 0. So that means I need this right-hand side set equal to 0 first. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 2x from both sides. When I do that, the result is going to be 4x squared minus 2x minus 12 equals 0. So now I'm able to look at this left-hand side and try to factor it so that I get my two factors equal to 0, and I can use the zero product property. Well, there's a lot of stuff happening over here on the left-hand side. And if I look at this, I notice that this leading coefficient is a 4, and not everything is divisible by 4. So I can't use the greatest common factor method. But I can use the idea of a greatest common factor to make my problem a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is factor a 2 out. Because if you look at the numbers 4, 2, and 12, they're all even. So I get 2x squared minus 1x. You can write the 1 if it makes you happy, but you don't have to. And then minus 6. And this is what I'm going to use in my harder diamond problem. So if you haven't watched the video on reviewing our factoring methods, please go back and watch that. Because if you don't know how to do these different methods for factoring, you're going to struggle big time. So let's look at setting up our harder diamond for this. So I'm going to do that down here. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. And I have negative 1 in the bottom. Well, what two numbers multiply to negative 12 but add to negative 1? It's going to be negative 4 and positive 3. Notice that I wrote those small because you have to incorporate the idea of a fraction. Since we multiplied the 2 in, we're going to divide the 2 out. And then I'll simplify those fractions as I bring them over into my factors. So I still got that 2 sitting out front, but then 4 over 2 reduces to be 2, because 4 divided by 2 is 2. So we get x minus 2. 3 over 2 does not reduce, so I bring that over as x minus 3 halves. Sorry, 3 halves. And I could go ahead and set these equal to 0 as they are. If you remember how we wrote this out before, what we would do is we would go ahead and take that fraction and we would get rid of it. We would make it x minus 2, and then we would bring that denominator out front, and we get 2x minus 3. And that's actually the factored form of our quadratic. We would have the 2 out front, x minus 2, and 2x minus 3. But since we're now solving, we need to set each of those factors equal to 0 because we have this right-hand side of equal to 0. So I get x minus 2 equals 0, and I get 2x minus 3 equals 0. So here x is going to be 2. Here we get 2x equals 3. And then if you divide both sides by 2, you get x equals 3 halves. And I'm going to leave that as a fraction. If you type it in your calculator and tell me that it's 1.5, I won't mark it wrong, but I'm definitely going to leave it as a fraction. And what you might notice is this 3 halves is the same as the 3 halves that we got up here. So instead of rewriting it into the 2x minus 3, I'm okay if you go ahead at this stage and set your factors equal to 0. So if you had written x minus 2 equals 0, you'd still get x equals 2. And if you wrote x minus 3 halves equals 0, I know it's a fraction, and I know you guys seem like you want to hate them, but if we had x minus 3 halves equals 0, if you just add 3 halves to the other side, you get the answer that we got down here at the end without the extra steps. If you do the extra steps because that's the way you remember it, that's totally fine. But I'm also okay with you just jumping from this stage down to writing the factors. It's whichever one makes you happy. I don't care. You might need to watch this example several times. These problems are harder. I think there's only one like this on your practice problems. But again, just watch until you understand. If you have questions, email me. I'd rather you ask than just not do things.